Hi all, my name is Davis and welcome to my channel where we cover all things tech. And today I am going to break a lot of hearts here because I'm going to say that this phone I prefer to the 8849 Tank 3 Pro. Yep, I've said it. Compared to the most popular phone that's ever appeared on this channel, I prefer this one. And this phone that I'm talking about today is also one of the weirdest. And it's from Blackview and it's called the Oscal Pilot 2. I assume it's not in reference to the Palm Pilot, but being a Palm tragic, I like to assume so anyway. Okay, so first impressions. It actually looks like a pretty ordinary tough phone. It's made of a nice combination of glass, aluminium, and metal. However, jaws will drop when you turn it around because you might notice that this phone not only has one display, but there are two displays because there's a screen on the back that also looks a bit like a smartwatch, and that's where you usually find the cameras. As you can see, the cameras have been moved to the sides. And to be fair, yes, we have seen this gimmick with the Unihertz TikTok phones before. However, where those phones always felt a little bit underbaked and a little bit disappointing, this thing is anything but that. Despite the relatively entry-level specs, which you might expect from a sub $300 US device, the Pilot 2 has outperformed my expectations so much that it's actually become one of my favorite phones of the year. And yeah, that really has shocked me a lot. So this video was brought to you by the ultra-human Ring Air. When I moved to the UK recently, unfortunately, I couldn't bring my massive tech collection with me. In fact, things got so bad that I even had to leave my beloved Palm collection behind. Because extra luggage is expensive, I could only bring the bare essentials, and the ultra-human Ring Air over the past few months has become essential for me. Not only is it the most lightweight smart ring on the market, but it is also among the most comfortable, and it brings you fantastic and actually useful health data. It tells you when it's the best time to have a coffee, the best time you should go to bed, that your temperature is a little bit higher and that you should probably relax a little bit more. And now with the latest update, it can even measure your stress levels and you can track it over time. And they've even opened the APIs to developers, so expect to see a lot more features to come. And the best bit, the battery life actually lasts up to 5 days, so you barely have to think about charging it. And what I also love, this is a smart piece of tech that doesn't look like a smart piece of tech. And that's pretty much the most amazing part about it. You can buy the ultra-human Ring Air through the link in my bio and receive 10% off your purchase if you use my discount code Davis10. So just let me take you through the hardware first. So it very much looks like a typical tough phone. It's 17mm thick, which is thick but not outrageous. It weighs a fairly hefty 368 grams, which is heavy but not outrageous again, and is covered in a tough rubberized plastic. However, it's more than just that. According to Blackview, it's made of an incredibly rigid aluminium alloy frame. And I think it is pretty rigid because I can't bend it at all. The screws on the side apparently are genuine for easy de-assembly, and the rubberized plastic is made up of just one piece, and it feels incredibly high quality and most importantly doesn't creak at all. I just love how this rubberized bezel wraps around the screen, which creates a little bit of a lip for the Gorilla Glass 5 covered display, and so that should protect it pretty well. So on the front of the phone is actually one of my favorite parts of it, and I'm genuinely surprised that I am. Where most tough phones have fairly ordinary displays, this one actually is pretty good. It's a 6.5-inch Full HD Plus IPS display, and I am genuinely surprised by how nice it is. Too often I've seen screens on tough phones which are very badly calibrated, but not here at all. The whites actually look like white and not yellow or bluish. It also gets reasonably bright at 500 nits, although to be fair, that's still a little bit too dim to use outside. It's a very nice display overall, and it gets better because it's also 120 Hz, so it actually feels pretty smooth to use. Even the bezels aren't that bad. Okay, so there's clearly more than enough space to fit a camera on the top of the display instead of having a cutout punch hole for the selfie camera, but you know, it's just something that I've learned to live with. Beyond the screen though, I do like the rubberized corners that make the phone incredibly tough, and on the bottom we do have a flap for the USB-C port that charges it up to 45 watts. I say this time and time again that while I do understand why these rubberized ports are here and why they exist, I'm just not a fan of these from a usability standpoint. At the very least, please just include wireless charging as well if you're going to do this, so that I don't have to pry this open every single time I want to charge the phone. But unfortunately, this phone doesn't have wireless charging, so there goes that. But down here we also have a mono speaker, and yes, unfortunately it is a mono speaker, but it is relatively clear and it is reasonably loud. On the left side of the phone, we have the action button, which is orange, just like on an Apple Watch Ultra, and it's very exciting. And on this side as well, we do have the SIM card tray, and you can also add your own micro SD card slot here. And from a reviewer's standpoint at least, I do love how you can just remove it with your fingernail, so you can swap SIM cards easily and quickly, but I suppose that's probably not relevant to most people. Being a tough phone, obviously you will find a super bright torch on this phone, and on the Pilot 2 they are on the top. Up here we do have a pair of LED bulbs, and currently I've got my action button set to enable them, and while they're not crazy, these lights are reasonably bright at 170 lumens. It isn't as bright as the ridiculous torch thing on the Tank phone, but it's still bright enough to be very useful when camping or performing other nighttime outdoor activities. On the other side of the phone, on the metal frame, we do have the word waterproof printed, which is quite a bold claim, isn't it? Despite it having an IP68 and IP69K water resistance, that only means that it's resistant to water up to 30 minutes at 1.5 meters of depth. And yes, that is very impressive, but that's only technically resistance and not being waterproof. But maybe that's just something that was lost in translation. But on this side, you also have the power button / fingerprint reader, which works very nicely. And we also have quite possibly the nicest volume buttons I have ever felt. There's just something to the way that this metal volume rocker clicks that I find absolutely mesmerizing. I could literally click this all day long. And finally, let's talk about the back of this phone. So back here is quite an interesting design. We've got a textured rubber back panel. There's a little hook on the bottom for a lanyard or something like that. And the top, we also have the secondary display. It's a round LCD. It's not the prettiest display in the world, but it is cool enough. And beside the display, we also have our two cameras. The one on the left being the main camera. It's a Samsung ISOCELL GM5 sensor, which is a 50 megapixel sensor that I believe was used on some of the older Galaxy S series phones, perhaps in S22, something like that. And it does have OIS as well. And on the right, we have a 13 megapixel ultra wide / macro camera combo thing. The cameras are pretty good on this thing, but we'll talk about them a little bit more in detail later. What I am most impressed with this hardware though, is that it somehow manages to have all of these tough features, plus a massive 8800 milliamp battery, all in a package that isn't unreasonably large. Like, you could actually daily this thing. So I like the hardware, but what is inside? Well, that did make me worry a little bit. So it's got the tried and true MediaTek Helio G99 chip, and while it is a 6nm chip, which isn't too dated, it is beginning to date, as we've seen this chip on a lot of phones over the past few years. Firstly, it doesn't have 5G, which should be a given these days, and secondly, the Geekbench scores aren't too impressive either. The single core score of 707 is disappointing, and the multi-core score of 1669 is every bit as poor as well. At least it is paired with a sizable 8GB of RAM, and the heat management apparently is very impressive, with a lot of use of copper and graphite. The graphics score isn't the worst either, with an OpenCL score of 1302, and actually, that is pretty bad. So the specs don't exactly sound promising, but little does this describe how this phone is like to use. Because when paired with a 120Hz screen, this thing feels like an absolute screamer. Okay, I admit that it does occasionally stutter and slow down. It does drop the occasional frame from time to time, but in day-to-day use, this thing feels almost as quick as a flagship smartphone. Animations are beautiful and silky smooth, apps open quickly and smoothly, and even split-screen multitasking works well. I could even play some games like Asphalt 9 extremely smoothly without any concern whatsoever. With a great cooling system as well that they've got in place, there's no throttling as well, and thank God, because I would hate to see what this looks like when throttled. But basically, while this might not be a fast chip, it feels incredibly well optimized with Android 14. But did they ruin Android 14? That is the question. So this thing runs something called Doki OS 4.0 or maybe Doke OS, and honestly, it's a fairly standard skin, and I like it enough. It looks pretty much like standard Android 14, but with some brighter colors. It's got a pretty nice looking iOS influenced launcher. I mean, look at this folder design. It's straight from iOS. And look at that weather icon as well. They're not hiding at all, are they? The only real complaint on the software front for me is the lack of updates. In a world where Pixel and Samsung phones are getting close to a decade of software updates, most Blackview/Oscal devices getting none at all really is quite disappointing. But maybe they'll prove us wrong with this unit. I doubt it, but there's a chance. Actually, there is another disappointing thing, and that is the secondary back screen, because to be fair, it really doesn't do much. We've had these type of displays for a number of years now from a number of brands, and this one still doesn't do that much, and neither is it particularly nice to use. Firstly, it doesn't stay on, so you can't just have your phone flipped on its front and use this as an always-on display, and that definitely is a little bit annoying. Secondly, it isn't a very nice quality display. It's an LCD panel, and the viewing angles really are not great. It's also kind of laggy. While it's better than some of the Unihertz devices I've used, it's definitely far from smooth. And it really shouldn't be this way with a screen that's so small and so low in resolution. But the thing is, you won't be using it that much because there's not actually that much that you can do with it. You can check your notifications, you can check the time, and there's quite a few watch faces to choose from as well. You can control your media playback, check your step count and calories, check the weather, use a compass, and you can also use it to take a photo with the rear camera. And while that's a pretty cool feature to have, it's no more than what the Unihertz devices did all of those years ago. And you still can't even record video with this camera app. And so one of the use cases that I imagine was vlogging. You can't really do that, I'm afraid. The screen also likes to freeze often, and the camera app doesn't even work all the time. And I just feel like that if they aren't going to develop this feature anymore, then they really shouldn't have bothered in continuing it. It's a little bit of a gimmick, but at the same time, it's kind of a cool one. And now we come to the cameras, and I'm positively surprised because they're actually pretty good. So the front camera is the usual 32 megapixel unit that we find on a lot of budget phones. And over here, it actually looks better than most. But don't expect miracles at the same time. While selfies in good light are fairly decent, it falls apart quickly when things get dark, and the video is atrocious. The main back camera though is a beauty, especially at this price point. It does all the Samsung things of exaggerating all the colors and exaggerating the HDR, but genuinely the camera is rather nice and it's very quick to use as well. The night mode doesn't seem to do much though, and the portrait mode is horrifying, but overall, it takes remarkably good images at this price point. It even takes decent videos because of the OIS on the sensor. However, due to the limitations of the processor, it's just limited to 2K and you won't get the 4K. That really should be standard now. Look at these photos over here. I genuinely think that these are pretty good and not embarrassing at all. The 16 megapixel ultra-wide camera on the other hand, it's a little bit rubbish, but you know, I'm glad it's there. It doesn't have a lot of dynamic range and images are both soft and noisy at the same time, but you know, it's fine. Okay, so we like the hardware, we like the software, and we even like the cameras of this phone. But do we know why I love it so much? It's the battery life. Thanks to the 8800 milliamp battery, battery life is absolutely insane. I can easily get through 2 days of usage with this thing, no questions asked. And the phone isn't ridiculously sized like a tank phone either. While it's bulky, it still feels like a normal phone. And of course, it charges relatively quickly with a 45-watt input. Okay, so in conclusion, what are my thoughts on the Blackview Oscal Pilot 2? Well, I think that this is one of the best budget phones that I've used all year. It costs less than $300, it's got a nice screen, and it's really, really nice to use. And it does have a fun gimmick on the back as well. However, the problems are it won't get any updates and it doesn't have 5G. But you know what? At this price, you could probably just sell this after a year and get the next model when it comes out. Overall, I really do like this phone and I feel genuinely sad in having to say goodbye to it when I start reviewing my next phone. So if you enjoy this video, please support the channel by liking and subscribing if you haven't done so yet. And be sure to comment down below if you've got any questions. And until next time, toodaloo.